Hey, Matt, can you hear me?
Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay. I couldn't get on for some reason. Good.
Good evening.
Hello.
Nice to meet you both. It sounds like we're just getting started.
Yes,
But
I had a hard time getting on. Peter, I think you and I were on a private meeting accidentally earlier, trying to figure everything out.
no worries. I'm a little out of pocket today, so I'm operating off my cell phone.
Ah,
But but I'm here and I'm really excited to meet you both. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about our project. And, it's our first time to interact. So I'll
Yeah.
just kind of follow along and let me know when I need to chime in.
Well, I think,
So we need a few more, right, to have a quorum?
yeah, we don't have a quorum right now. There's just the two of us. Unless there's more, no, there's Menlo Park. I don't know how many people have gone in person. I was gonna go in person and then I had a meeting run really late, so. There we go.
There we go.
We have a quorum. I was gonna see you all in person some other time. You're all muted.
Sounds
there,
like sounds like the mic's not working.
Commissioner Bigelow and
How about
Marilyn.
now?
There we go. Now we can hear you.
Thank you guys for your patience. We've been trying to figure this process out, and if it looks like I'm staring off into space, it's because you guys are actually on the wall here, but I have to look at the camera to talk to you there.
Sorry,
so.
Angie.
It's fine, it's fine. I'm happy it's successful. And Peter, thank you for being here. All right, welcome. I'm gonna get started, yeah? Okay. Welcome to the Housing Commission's February 1st, 2023 regular Housing Commission meeting. This is a hybrid meeting with Housing Commission members, city staff, and members of the public participating in the downtown conference room in accordance with public health guidelines for in-person meetings and participating remotely to promote social distancing in this federal, state, and local emergency. I will call the meeting to order at 6:40 p.m. I'd like to introduce staff and Housing Commission members present. Myself, Chair Lauren Bigelow, Commissioner Heather Leach, Commissioner Jackie Campos, Commissioner Nevada Merriman, and I do not see Commissioner Pimentel or when, but Commissioner Walker, I see you. And welcome to all of you. Also present, we have interim housing manager, Aaron Romero, management analyst, Adam Patterson, and associate planner, Matt Pruder. Aaron, would you please provide instructions to the Housing Commission and members of the public on how the meeting will proceed?
Thank you, Chair Bigelow and members of the Housing Commission. Welcome everyone to the February 1st regular meeting of the Housing Commission, and thank you for attending. At this time, we ask that the virtual members of the Housing Commission please remain on screen for the duration of the meeting. You will control your own webcams and microphones. Staff will engage cameras and microphones to make presentations and respond to the members of the Housing Commission. For the members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment on an item on tonight's agenda, after the chair calls for public comment on the item you wish to speak on, for virtual participants, please engage the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. For those who are calling in from a landline or a cell phone, please press *9. And for those in person, please complete a speaker card and bring to my desk. That concludes the instructions, and I return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Under public comment, the public may address the Housing Commission on any subject not listed on the agenda. Each speaker may address the Housing Commission once under public comment for a limit of 3 minutes. Please clearly state your name and address or political jurisdiction in which you live. The Housing Commission cannot act on items not listed on the agenda, and therefore the Housing Commission cannot respond to non-agenda issues brought up under public comment other than to provide general information. Aaron, do we have any public comment?
For members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment on an item on tonight's agenda, after a chair calls for public comment on the item you wish to speak on, the virtual participants, please engage the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. For those who are calling in from a landline or cell phone, please press *9. For those in person, please complete a speaker card and bring to my desk. Do you see anyone?
Oh, great.
Name,
Oh, lovely.
Sam Johnson,
Jones.
Jones.
Hello, this is Pam Jones, a resident of Menlo Park, the Bellhaven neighborhood. And I wish to thank each and every one of you that were a part of the joint meeting with the Planning Commission. The work that you did, your intentional work that you did, really helped change the policies in the housing element that was submitted last night. And it is definitely an asset. You are all an asset to the community. So I just want to thank you for that work and how deliberate you were to ensure that that information went to the council as a recommendation.
Thank you so much for the thank you, Pam. Okay, do we have any other public comments on non-agendized items? No, okay, seeing none, we'll move on to regular business. Under regular business, the Housing Commission receives informational presentations in addition to considering policy matters and administrative actions. Are there any clarifying questions from the Housing Commission on item D1, which is approving minutes from the Housing Commission regular meeting on December 7th, 2022, before taking public comment on the item? Any questions about the minutes? I am not seeing hands raised or hearing from anyone here, so I will go on to public comment. Do we have any public comment regarding the minutes? Seeing none, we will move on. The item is open for Housing Commission discussion and or a motion should people choose to make one regarding the minutes.
I motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you so much. Is there a second?
I second approval.
Love it, love it. Okay. All right, Erin, can we do a roll call vote?
Sure. Commissioner Campos,
Aye.
Commissioner Leach,
Aye.
Commissioner Merriman,
Yes.
Vice Chair One, absent, Commissioner Pimentel, absent, Commissioner Walker,
Aye.
Chair Bigelow,
Aye.
passes. Motion
Okay,
passes.
lovely. That brings us to our second item of the evening. The recommended approval to the Planning Commission for the payment of the below market rate housing in lieu fee for 4055 Bohannon Drive. Associate Planner Matt Pruder will introduce the item and I will lead discussion after the introduction.
Thank you, Chair Bigelow and members of the Housing Commission, members of the public. As stated, this is a project located at 4055 Bohannon Drive. And it is simply a request this evening for the recommendation of approval of a below market rate of BMR housing in lieu fee for the project. And with a quick overview, the site is an existing building. It contains an existing building that will be redeveloped in some ways, a little bit reconfigured. The gross floor area, which containing a little bit of the square footage of the building, will be modified. And it will change the actual square footage slightly. A slight increase will be proposed with this project, and it will increase from 31,559 square feet currently to 33,300 square feet. So there's a square footage change. There's also a change in use. Currently, it's mostly for storage and warehousing, and there is actually a portion of the building that is an office space dedicated to the warehouse use. So that's also seen in planning terms as a warehousing type use. And it's being converted completely for future research and development uses. And that proposal thus necessitates the BMR requirement to be met. And in this case, it's possible through this process to propose a BMR in lieu payment, which is being presented tonight. And I would also add that the final action for this project would be at the Planning Commission level. So we would be taking this to the Planning Commission in the near term. And pending no appeal from that decision, city council, that would be the final action for the project. And it is an architectural control request that the planning commission is also reviewing. And with that, I'll leave no further comment there, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And as noted earlier, we have Peter Banzaf from the applicant side. He's happy to quickly make some remarks, pending no questions from me. Thank you.
Okay. Peter, I'm going to go to other housing commissioners first to see if there are any clarifying questions, and then we'll come to you for your remarks. Are there any clarifying questions from other housing commissioners? Commissioner Leach, I see you.
Yes, maybe Peter is you're gonna cover this. This is, you're paying an in lieu fee, although you're not paying just to cover to cover yourselves, even though you're not doing other, it's not a residential development, it's a life sciences research development. Is that right?
I suppose,
That,
go ahead, Peter, sorry. Yes.
It's fine, go for it.
it may be Matt's place to answer it, but simply put, yes. I'm excited to explain more about the project, but I'll save for my time.
Perfect, appreciate it. We keep it loosey-goosey sometimes here with rules of order, it's fine. Okay. Commissioner Walker, I saw that you had your hand up as well. Was that the question that you had?
She asked my question directly, so I lowered my hand.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was heard and got their questions answered. Anybody here have questions? No? Oh, yes.
Not a question related to the project per se,
Okay.
but at some point, this commission had done some work on the fee structure in general.
Yep.
And do we know where that is with the city?
It's still on hold and still staffing levels come up,
Yeah.
so, yeah,
They need-
that is on the radar.
They need
So
to
it's
do,
been on hold for like 2 years. Is that right?
we've moved forward more with it, but not. And we got to the point where they could actually commission a study, but then that
It
has
would
been
be
on hold.
helpful to know what projects are really anticipated to come through the pipeline in the next 12 months. You all know what they are because you're working on them a bit, and to just understand the structure.
True,
Thank you.
true. Hearing about the pipeline would be amazing. Okay, so back to Bohannon. All right. Any other questions before we go to Peter? Seeing none, Peter, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, commissioners. I haven't had a chance to introduce myself. My name is Peter Banzoff. I'm one of the principals of Helios Real Estate Partners. We're based in San Francisco. It's a small company. My partner, Brian Kaysen, and I founded Helios in 2020. We have projects in the San Francisco Peninsula, 2 in Burlingame, which is where I live, and 1 in Foster City. 4055 Bohannon is our first project in Menlo Park. We're really excited about it. I used to drive 101 corridor frequently. And so I've always been familiar about Menlo Park, but never had an opportunity to really do business in the city. So it's a two firsts for me, one as a principal, one as an applicant. And so I'm familiar with the neighborhood because I used to drive 101, and it's a wonderful place for a research and development building. The zoning change that kind of converted this neighborhood from historic industrial uses to more office and professional uses is in keeping with how we're envisioning our business plan. And so when we looked at the project, and we'll get into this, I would imagine at a different meeting, but when we looked at the project, we wanted to keep the shape and the form of the building because it works really well right now. And from a sustainability standard, we're not removing things that don't need to be removed for no reason. And that's part of us trying to, repurpose what we have. What we can't use is the front of the building. That's the office appendage that Matt alluded to earlier. So we're putting that inside the space. And that, we're creating a new mezzanine with a new core. So even with those movements, we're not creating enough site plan to create on-site housing. However, the project itself is almost a complete reno, even though we're keeping the shell of the building. So as a result, it's a major project and it qualifies for the BMR fee because we're creating that need. So long-winded way of saying the neighborhood really has been historically industrial, so it doesn't have the services for housing. The site is constrained because we're reusing the same building for those purposes. There's no real place to put a housing unit there. So it's ill-suited for on-site housing. As a result, we would like to request your approval to pay the in lieu fee, and that's why we're here this evening.
Got it. Okay, that's really helpful context. Thank you so much. Okay, the item is open for Housing Commission discussion. Anybody have any comments? Or motions, if you don't have comments? Up to you. I know y'all aren't this quiet.
Well, in my opinion, this is kind of the most straightforward style of agreement that we ever see.
Agreed.
It's a in lieu fee or non-housing component within the project in a particular neighborhood that I would concur is not particularly well suited for housing.
Yep.
So with all that in mind, my fellow commissioners agree that that's where we are at. I would make a motion to recommend approval to the planning commission for payment of the BMR fee as stated in the staff report.
Maybe we should check on public comment.
Oh, you're right. We should check on public comment. I'm so sorry.
Hold that thought.
Right? Yeah, please, please. I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
Remember what I said earlier?
Thanks for
about-
the reminder.
Yes.
We're getting excited.
Are there any public comments regarding this particular item?
There is.
Oh,
Okay.
welcome.
Pam,
Yeah, hi, this is Pam Jones again. I'm looking at this address and it appears that it's in an area just behind the post office. And if that's true, this area is walking distance to Marsh Manor, but I could be wrong with that location. But most of the everything in the Bohannon Industrial Park is within walking distance of amenities. And they do have a grocery store, bank. What else do they have? They have a lot of amenities there. So I just wanted to make that clear. Although I see in this circumstances that there's really only the one option, and that's supporting the project. Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate that comment, Pam. Thank you.
agreed. Always thoughtful comments. Any other public comment? Okay, then we can come back to,
You have a motion on the table.
I do. Do I have a second for the motion is the real question.
I second that.
Love it. We're cooking with gas. All right, then can we do a roll call vote?
Sure. Commissioner Campos,
Aye.
Commissioner Leach,
Aye.
Commissioner Merriman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Gwen, absent. Commissioner Pimentel, absent. Commissioner Walker,
I'm not sure if I understand an in lieu payment. If I'm kind of learning along the way. So can we explain why there is a BMR in lieu payment or what that is, I guess?
That's a great idea. Always good to explain.
I'm happy to.
Go for
give that if I
it.
may
Yeah,
do the check.
please.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Commissioner Walker. The way that in lieu fee payments are structured are to compensate for the inability to build the required amount of affordable housing on site based on the calculations of square footage changes. In this case, there's a slight increase in the gross floor area, the square footage of the building. That is a slight change, but more importantly, there's a use change. The use type is changing. In the staff report, there's a table that kind of shows two use categories. That's where the calculation comes from. It establishes what would be needed. And I apologize, I'll just pull that up on my end, but to additionally clarify, the equivalent amount of units that would be needed is 0.78, given the scope of work. And so it would round up to 1 unit. So 1 BMR unit would be needed if we were to build that on site. And so typically with projects like this, we take in a number of factors. One is obviously the location and the zoning. In this case, the zoning does not allow housing as a permitted use. And so that kind of complicates how you'd be able to, in a zoning sense, create the conditions for building on-site housing. But more importantly, this pathway is typical for projects where there is kind of a lesser number of BMR unit requirements that apply. And so this the other thing I would add is that we typically have this type of request in place for projects that are of this nature, office, research and development, industrial type uses as well. And what that does is that just allows for the funding for future offsite in different location BMR units to be built. And this creates more funding in that regard with this mechanism in place.
The way I generally think about below market rate in lieu fees is that we have limited land. And by using some of our limited land not for affordable housing, businesses pay to be able to a fee, and then the city can leverage that fee later on to get affordable housing, 100% affordable housing properties built using those funds. But essentially in page D 2.2 of the packet, paragraph 5, they talk about commercial development projects of 10,000 square feet or greater are subject to the city's BMR ordinance. And they kind of go into a little bit more detail about the feasibility that Matt was talking about and why we would essentially want a lump sum rather than 1 unit at a life sciences building that abuts 101. So that
I might only add that there's like a academic or intellectual debate about this. That's kind of as a, I don't know, a 30+ year policy discussion that seemed, that if I could just sum it up, is a little bit like, you could have the 1 unit in the R&D building or in a market rate apartment, residential apartment, you could have even a few units at a slightly below market, or with these funds, it can be invested and often create greater affordability because the city can then partner with groups, nonprofits and other types of groups that have the ability to go get other types of government funding from the county, from the state, from the federal government, and that can bring about deep affordability. So there's a couple different reasons I think that this fee is flexible and that it allows the city to make progress on their housing goals in across the income spectrum instead of just slightly reduced to market, which is what you would get in a regular ordinance, that it would, the people would set the targeting for the units at kind of the highest possible.
Yeah, so it becomes a question of, do you want the housing on site, or do you want the funds so that you can pursue other housing off-site? Is kind of what that
And then this
boils down to.
commission over 6 years has generally moved in concert with residential, try to bring forth the creation of the home and not the fee.
Right,
And in almost all cases, when it's this style of proposal before us, we usually are just looking at kind of the math, and that the applicant's prepared to pay the fee per statute.
yep. There you go.
How'd we do?
Thank you. Thank you. In that case, aye.
There you go, okay.
Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
It's always
Okay.
good to explain the terms and the acronyms.
Oh,
Because even
absolutely.
though I'm a rank beginner, I'm more familiar than I was a year ago, and it's easy to forget that.
Well, not only is it easy to forget, but we want this information and these meetings to be as accessible as humanly possible. So somebody walking in off of the street could understand what the heck we're talking about. And that's not always clear with housing. I would say that's most often not clear with housing. But
Goodness, I wasn't gonna do this, but Mr. Kruger, do you think in the future when we get these particular reports, staff reports, you might just add a little bit of that context that I tried to crudely summarize, but I think it would be helpful. If you recall from my first comment at the last meeting of the related to the housing element, it was a broad comment, but it's like a burning issue for me, which is, I work for a developer and this is very dense reading material and has a very clear institutional bias. And, while this is excellent for me to read, I appreciate it. I also think as a resident, doing the extra step to kind of bottom line it for the public is really helpful. And maybe that can be I'm not going to recommend a standard section, but just a little context that hopefully could get repeated a little bit depending on the style of project that we're looking on
yeah,
to capture sort of where we are as a commission and our preferences and with some of that
Right.
historical bit.
I appreciate the brevity, and also recognize that sometimes the brevity can be exclusionary. And so being able to speak not to industry experts, but to anyone in the community, I think would be a lovely guiding principle when it comes to these agendas. Okay. We still haven't finished our vote. Still haven't finished our vote, though.
We'll go back to Commissioner Walker.
Said I.
Aye.
Great.
Chair Bigelow,
Aye.
motion passes.
Lovely.
Thank you, Mr. Bronza.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for being here, Nat.
Thank-
Okay,
Thank you. Have a good evening.
thank you, you too. Okay, so next up, we have a limited amount of time in which to work on our work plan. So, we talked about doing more community engagement work. So along the comments that Commissioner Merriman kind of made, making this information more accessible, relevant, for folks so that they can participate. Yeah, really just lowering barriers to entry to these conversations is what I'm personally interested in. But what I say doesn't always go because we're a democratic body. So, okay. I think that the item here is mostly trying to figure out, are there any milestones, any timelines that we want to apply to this work plan, so that we can measure our progress over the next 6 months. And with that, that is the introductions slash presentation. Does anybody have clarifying questions before we take public comment? Because I'll actually remember this time. Okay.
This work plan is through the end of June of this year.
Mhm. Yep.
It takes, the work plan takes into account the reduced staff time we have, right?
Correct.
That is correct. And so right now we have two buckets, focus on the development of affordable housing on public lands and community engagement. And I believe the feedback we got from staff was that the public lands piece has been backburnered. So that leads me to believe that we need to be all in on community engagement. Okay, any other clarifying questions?
Are we thinking specifically community, do we have any specifics about community engagement? Are we thinking meetings, articles, op-eds?
So they're out, we have two kind of outlined items on the work plan, provide information and education related to tenant rights, tenant protections, and anti-displacement efforts. And also host and co-host local legal resources presentations via the Housing Commission as part of expanding community engagement. So how we pursue those, I think, is subject to a conversation. Our measurement criteria is 2 informational events, 1 event every 6 months at Belhaven location, and we want them to be multilingual inclusive. So that.
So maybe what topics would you want to focus on for like the events?
Our role as a housing commission, is it to put on the events or support at the events, or what is our role exactly?
I kind of think it is what we make of it, because previously we've done community engagement work, but it was here and there. We haven't done that in a while, partially because pandemic. And so I think that we could potentially be the convener of the event and try to organize things ourselves, or we could work in concert with somebody else who is moving the programming forward. And we just kind of co-sponsor. So there are options, which is sometimes having too many options is a bad thing. And so I think that's why it's important to have this discussion now to kind of whittle down what we want to pursue so we can make measurable progress on these things.
Is that one thing would be, I'm wondering, just generally speaking, would there be some kind of, just in speaking in terms of public engagement or education, I love the Belhaven multilingual idea. I think that's really where we need to live. In addition, might we do something to, I don't know that most people understand what we're talking about when we're talking about low income housing. If you owned your house for a number of years, like I have, you really don't grasp what it means to how expensive it is around here, and how deep and wide and thick the housing, how the inaccessible, unaffordable housing hits everyone. And I think, I don't know if it's the purview of the Housing Commission, but might we consider an op-ed or a editorial opinion piece somewhere? Or like a, this is what I do, so that's what I'm thinking.
Cool. Before we get too deep in the weeds on brainstorming, though, I want to just make sure that we take public comment if there aren't any other clarifying questions. So I'm going to put it out there. anybody has clarifying questions about this at this point?
I'm already in the weeds because I help with the work plan.
No, you're,
So-
I,
I understand that it ends in June, correct? So when would we need to put it on, like tomorrow?
that is kind of the question, right? Is it's already February and that's not very much time. So the figuring out the meter that we want to put on events, if we want to plan events that don't happen before June, but are planned for, things like that. I think are possible explorations of that. But I could see in the next 4 months, you know, something like every other month happening. I don't know. That's an idea.
We partner with other nonprofits who are having events at Bellhaven. I think
We could, and one of them is supposed to be in Bellhaven, and the other can be anywhere, but we specifically want to deepen our connection with Bellhaven. I think is one of the most important things. Also, showing the rest of Menlo Park that there are possibilities for housing in the rest of those neighborhoods as well, I think could be a very useful thing to explore. Okay. But if there are not any other clarifying questions, I'm just going to check in and see if we have any public comment. Do we have any public comment? Cool, then we,
Sorry.
oh, I lied to you just then, I'm sorry.
Pam Jones.
Beautiful. Welcome back, Pam. Happy to have you.
Thank you, and I think I just happened to hit the right night. Because my intention was actually to just sit and listen. But I do want to share some things, some of the things that were discussed at meetings and also within the meetings that are on other subjects that are ongoing in the Bellhaven neighborhood. And a part of the outreach and the informational meetings that are in regards to explaining all the nuances around affordable housing. It also has a lot to do with tenants' rights and making sure that tenants really understand the information. And that's not a one-time thing. And at one point, you have the once every 6 months, and that's at a minimum, you know, to do that. And the key with that is having something that helps to reassure the landlords that they are considered a part of this process. And the fact that we're educating residents so that they are not inadvertently going to have to pay an additional income or else move, or, you know, be told they have to move tomorrow because they've just decided that. And oftentimes tenants don't know what they can do, and we can't expect the landlord to tell them. And I know I'm speaking to the audience here, but these are recorded. So preaching to the choir, as it were. So I really wanted you to be mindful of that. Now, during this next couple of months, the community of Bellhaven is working on the environmental justice element and the safety element. So there are some critical things that are happening. So having the schedules so that they work in such a way that people have enough time and energy to be involved with all of these things. And then I also have to say, I want to commend you on recognizing that how important that language justice is, and particularly since we know that there's various levels of language. And when we use the high level Spain language, it's different than what people speak. You know, the King's English is different than what we speak. So I really appreciate that work that you're doing. So thank you.
Of course, and thank you for your thoughts. Okay, so I'm opening it up for discussion / brainstorming. What are folks interested in? When are folks interested in having I would like an event in May because that's Affordable Housing Month. And that seems like a prime time to do that.
Might we approach Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County
I think that would be a great idea.
to
Work in concert. Yeah,
recommend resources as may be available?
right. And I think, you know, if there's understanding policy and then there's real world applications. And so I expect that HLC would be a beautiful partner for exploring policy, doing things like know your rights training, and understanding how tenant protections affirmatively further fair housing. I would perhaps talk to organizations like Tenants Together or San Mateo County law. Can't remember the last initial
Project,
something.
the one that Shirley used to.
Yes, yes, exactly.
I know that San Mateo County Legal Aid also partners with cities and hosts
That's-
the Know Your Rights workshop.
Yes, San Mateo County legally. That's what it was. Thank you, thank you. Cool. So potential.
Can I just
Non-
riff on what you're saying here a little bit? So there's
Please.
this application side and there's a policy side. I think
Mhm.
would be very helpful if at our next meeting, staff could help pull out some of the policies that could be on the table here, so we can kind of look at them and discuss them, because again, kind of how it's written is very high level to the point where it's not really bottom line for the commissioners or even really the public, so we have some work to do in expanding our own plan to kind of make sense to the average reader. I include myself in that, because I'm like, which policies are we talking about? Which policies are our priority to make sure that?
Because there are so many.
It's like a dozen of them, so.
Right.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to focus a little bit, and that's something that I'd love, you know, some help at the staff level, but also public input on in terms of what is needed, what's the priority.
I'd also love Housing Commission input on, are there any policies that you feel like would be useful for the public to understand better, for you to understand better? Because if you need to understand something better, the likelihood is high that the public does too. So if there are questions that you have, that I don't see that as an issue. I see that as an opportunity to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah,
I think generally, an overview of the terminology, the acronyms, RENA, BMR, just what they mean. And really some of I can't stress enough how much people don't understand what we're talking about when we're talking about the low income housing, very low income, extremely low income, moderate income. I mean, I bring this up to people I know who are fancy themselves like I do, aware, forward thinking, progressive, and completely unaware of just how expensive things have gotten. And so explaining some of our terminology, great opportunity to just jump on my soapbox and talk about it. But just explaining our terms is always helpful. And with some real world examples. And it's been an uphill climb for me to kind of come to terms to understand some of the terms and some of the policies. I only now, a year in, have some idea of what I don't know. So I can imagine what people who are just dropping in, I mean, any number of people who dial in regularly know way more than I do. And it's always interesting for me to learn more and hear more from different people.
So what I'm hearing is kind of a request for level setting, so a foundational kind of, these are the things you should understand as like housing policy 101 and the acronym soup of housing. And it's, yeah, that still covers a lot. I would recommend that we would not pursue anything that would take several hours to digest, just because that's somewhat unkind to the audience, I think, especially for information as dense as this.
So something I had previously provided to a couple housing managers ago was the copy of the East Palo Alto's. I believe that's an ordinance and it's related to tenants' rights. It has quite a few suggestions in there that to me, you know, for lack of a better word, are like no brainers. They're for things that we would want to do. Anti-harassment, anti-intimidation, all sorts of things that you look and you read and you're like, yes, obviously I do not want to be harassed or intimidated by my landlord. In addition to breaking down kind of what some state laws have passed in the last 5 years or so, now require in terms of it's like the anti-rent gouging in terms of the max limit. Yes, I think that's important for people just to know what that is, how the frequency with which your rent can be raised, and some of this other stuff that I believe is like highly non-controversial. And then they become policies that are maybe have more differences of opinion between balancing community rights with potential business interests. So those are kind of in a different bucket, but that would be a good place for us to look to just and start to sort a little bit in terms of ones that might be take a little bit more time to pursue or develop an opinion on, and then others that I would put in this category of like, yes, we should be able to advocate for that because it's just basal to being a good citizen. So
right, and I would also add that Nevada is specifically speaking, at least I think, so please feel free to correct me, about AB 1482, which is the Tenant Protection Act of 2019. There are several different levels and moving parts within that. I spent several years researching it, so I'm happy to help there and
provide your staff report.
Yeah, exactly. It was 30 pages long. So yeah, happy to do that. Also, the Biden administration just released a blueprint for a renter's bill of rights. And so that includes kind of some carve outs from about what rights renters should have. Commissioner Walker, I see you.
Commissioner Merriman started speaking and then the light went off in my head. So the chief complaint that I get where I reside is how many times a tenant has to recertify. Because there have been instances where we were recertifying in January, then they want you to recertify in May, and then they're hitting you again in December with a new lease. So that is something specifically to where I am is a frustration for tenants.
Yeah, I get that. And I think that part of the difficulty with recertification is that many times it's moved forward by financing from buildings or from making sure that you are in alignment with state or federal law, and it stinks, and it is disruptive, and I think that maybe part of doing that work is about managing expectations. So actually figuring out what the rhythm is of recertifications. So you can prep and it isn't such a big deal and stressful, but definitely what do you need to keep a hold of so that you can recertify easily is smart to keep on hand, right? Okay. So, right, we have some ideas on the table here. It sounds like exploring basics of housing policy and exploring what rights tenants have would be great to do in the next 4 months.
I think also educating landlords. would be
Oh, yeah.
important.
Yeah,
And this
it's true, because honestly, state and city law are always changing. So again, getting everybody up to speed is helpful. Okay, so how do we need to proceed on this item? Do we want to calendar things? Do we want to decide on programming? Do we need to break it down so that we say we have, you know, if we're trying for at least 2 events over the next 4 months, by next month, we have nailed down the partner, and the beginnings of programming. And then the next month we put on an event.
I think maybe if we do like, so this covers through June, like I like the idea of doing something in maybe we also do something in April. Because I think doing something in March just isn't going to happen. It's already February. April's
Right.
already ambitious, but maybe
Yeah.
by next month, maybe we say, you know, we'll do something those 2 months, and next month we'll have more of a, like, we'll have something nailed down in terms of partners and dates.
Okay, and locations, yeah. Okay, I think those seem reasonable. Staff, how do you guys feel about that?
I think that's reasonable. I mean, and do let us know, like, you know, find a place and book it.
Okay, all right, so then we would need to. What do we think? Next, yes,
Sorry, I have one clarifying question.
yeah,
I know I think previously we had sort of discussed that they might be in place of housing commission meetings. And if that's the case, we would want to get pretty long advance notice, to make sure there are no items from like planners that are coming up for.
Sure.
Like that. Just in case, it doesn't have to be those times, but I know we talked about that being.
So maybe the April timeframe that we were thinking about, because we don't have an April commission date. Is that what?
We're planning by year, there's the holidays there.
got it, right, yes. Gotta be respectful of our yeah, Jewish population as well. So, okay, right, it sounds like.
We could pull an April date.
Yeah, polling for an April date would be great. Polling for a May date would be ideal.
Passover starts April 5th. So that would be our first, that would officially be our, how, in it through the 13th. So that would be the first 2 weeks of April. We could maybe pick one of those times.
I want to avoid doing anything during Passover, just for those who observe. So I think doing something in the second half of April
Okay.
would be preferable. And just so all members of our community can participate. And okay, and May, do we know what date in May we have, the 3rd of May? Okay. So if we were doing something in the latter half of April, it probably doesn't make sense to do May 3rd. So we should maybe look at mid-May or later in the month, to do something, just so, and that would mean that it could be a slightly heavier month when it comes to, meeting time, but if we were partnering with an organization that provided the programming, I don't think that that would be too heavy a lift.
And this would be evening meetings.
Evening / weekend, I think is what is accessible for most of the community, just because during the day, a lot of people are working. Okay, great. So that feels like a couple of ideas of dates, and I really liked the idea of, I know it says possibly ongoing, for estimated completion time. Doing something like landlord outreach training, policy, education, rights training on a regular basis, is something that I hope that the housing department can actually do, because I do think that it helps give people footing in the community, and it feel less alone when they're going after these things. Okay, so does anybody else have any thoughts about any of these things? Timing.
I
Go
like
ahead.
the idea of having them be like what you were just building on what you were saying, Chair Bigelow, on the ongoing training. That seems like something we could have every couple of months at one of the libraries, Menlo Park Library, Bellhaven.
And make a commitment to do it for a little bit too. So because
I
the first,
draft Chair Bigelow and Commissioner Merriman.
thanks. We've been voluntold.
I'll be there holding up things, so it's
Okay, beautiful. Everybody needs a Vanna, and Vanna's is just as important as the wheel. Or no, that's not the wheel, that's all of the
I got
letters. Yes,
So
yeah,
maybe having a nonprofit, who knows the topics and the rights to partner.
yeah, I think that and I'm happy to support any of those efforts. I don't think we have an action item on this, so unless there are any other thoughts regarding.
I was just wondering for transparency.
Yeah.
It's not related to this topic, but it is related to what's been identified for years as a priority for the commission related to city-owned land for housing. How does it square that is backburnered when there's also some more structure around state deadlines to see progress on housing element site development? So what's the thinking there?
I know that this is the city council, this is a priority, but right now it was just adopted last night. I think that
Right.
city staff needs to kind of coordinate on the different programs that were part of the housing element. But I know they are very interested. And just as an FYI, UC Berkeley is very interested in starting affordable housing in city-owned properties. So we are going to be a case study for them, so that's going to start.
Through the Turner Center or through
Not
DCRP?
really sure, it's UC Berkeley, as far as I know, is the
Interesting.
students who are interested, so cool. We'll hear
Okay.
more about it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I don't think it was when I was last told, about the public lands piece, I don't think it was necessarily back burner was probably the wrong term. Essentially, the thought that I heard, was that it's part of the housing element. And so they were going to kind of pursue that separately and we could partner, work in tandem with that.
And one thing that commission could probably think about is like what items should be studied first within.
So prioritization of public lands, interesting, okay.
Yeah, and I guess, and I don't know this for sure, but I'd say relative to the time frame of this work plan, which is just in June.
Yep.
That would be kind of outside of that time frame. So I think maybe it's.
I mean, it depends on the piece of it, right? So like, I think if you go step by step, you see other jurisdictions, which we just did somewhat through the housing element work, but, you know, identify public site for housing capacity. If the jurisdiction is lucky enough to have a revenue generator like the city does, start to program some of that funding to, you know, do an RFP for master planning services and start to kind of just, and maybe also community outreach services to get some shared community vision or council vision. You know, staff has a few decisions to make in terms of alongside council in terms of how to kind of go about that, but you know, one foot in front of the other. It's kind of looking for steps that evidence progress.
Yeah, and that was what this discussion was supposed to be about. And I think we made a lot of progress on the community engagement piece and identifying what progress we could conceivably make while working with staff in the housing element in the next 6 months. I think.
Yeah, I guess my suggestion would be like your neighbors in Redwood City, looking for adding capacity through third-party consultant services, because it is extreme here, but it is happening everywhere. That you know, there's a lot of staff vacancies, and that constrains the amount of work that can be done. So I know even consultants take staff to manage. So it is not just a panacea to say throw a consultant at that.
Right.
But it, you know, the right relationship could greatly help staff with their capacity. You know, this will be a long project, so it'll be for a number of years.
It's true. Yeah, these things do take time. Okay. All
But we
right.
have land and money, which usually means that
Progress
something
can occur.
happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That
So,
is
to
the
be
hope.
developers, to be an optimist. So let's be optimistic that we can find some achievable steps in here.
Got it. Okay. Well, I'm gonna close out conversation then on item D3, and we can move on to informational items. I don't see any informational items, so I will move on to reports and announcements. Do we have any individual commissioner updates?
I have an update, and it's kind of ties into our community engagement piece. Bellhaven Action has been putting on some housing application workshops, and they're putting on a few this month. The first one is this Saturday at the Bellhaven Library from 1 to 1:30, and then the following 2 Mondays at the Mount Olive Church from 5:30 to 8 p.m. I can send you the information, Erin, but if any of you are available to volunteer, volunteers are needed for assistance.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have any individual commissioner updates that they want to share? Neil? Okay,
I might just say that, you know, last week we had a real tragedy in our county related to gun violence in Half Moon Bay. And if you look at the conditions that the shooter was living in, the squalid conditions, obviously that speaks to a lack of mental health care. And and the lack of housing for farm workers and more societal issues. But that conversation is really kind of being lifted up in the county right now. Around just the amount of suffering that lack of housing, and then what we as a society have, when we see, you know, some of the what happens next is tragic. And wanted to bring that to focus us to make sure that we don't get complacent with not really getting a whole lot done. We actually really need to get things done. On housing here.
Yeah. Amen to that. Okay. Do I have? Okay, Erin, would you provide staff updates and announcements?
As mentioned earlier, the housing element was adopted last night and the council approved the amendments made by the housing commission, the suggestions, and staff will be submitting the housing element to HCD for certification. Next week, the environmental justice and safety element committee meeting at Belhaven Library at 6 p.m. Thursday will be in English and Friday in Spanish, which I'll attend. So hopefully you guys can join me. And then something exciting, the housing staff recruitments have started. The housing manager position is open and will be closing February 26th. So we're also interviewing for the 2 housing management analyst positions this week and next week. So this is moving forward. The next time I have NOFA proposal application deadline was last Friday, and we did receive 3 proposals. And the last update I have is we have some housing rental opportunities coming up soon. Middle Plaza, 500 El Camino, which is offering 8 units at low income for low income households. So that should be coming up within this month. No, don't exactly know the date, but it should be this month. And Mid-Penn Gateway Rising at 1345 Willow also is taking applications, which opened this Monday, and I think the closing date is on the 17th. I think that was all my updates.
Those are some big ones. Those are significant. Okay, well then.
I did have a follow-up question for Commissioner Campos. She said volunteers were needed in what capacity?
So we're specifically assisting with the applications for the Mid-Penn housing that Erin just mentioned. So basically just assisting them with filling out the application.
Okay, I can pencil myself in there.
So I'll see you
I
there.
will be there.
Great.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to members of the public who are watching, commenting, participating. We appreciate you. I will adjourn this meeting at 7:47 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.